Let's dive right in. So let's talk about psychological safety. Why does it matter so much right now? So Keith, why don't you talk a little bit about why psychological safety is so important for employees today?
Yeah, I think psychological safety right now for employees is a broad topic. We're focusing on AI here, but overall, people need to feel safe to speak up, feel to be heard, feel to know that the message they're getting, whether it be from the top, sideways, from the bottom, is accurate, is true, and it's not people putting up a front. I think for many years we've lived in this environment where you don't always trust what's been said at work, or you don't say even at home. It goes beyond work, and we have to manage that and make sure people can trust what they do, because people perform more when they know that they are working in an environment that is conducive, that they're not questioning everything that's said, everything that's done, ulterior motives, and everything like that. And I think that's where it lays the best right now.
And how do we do, we're a bunch of L&D folks here. How do we help upskill people while still managing the change fatigue that has been happening with the rapid innovation and changes in the market today?
I think from an L&D standpoint, it's important that, one, the way we do even wording stuff, the way we present stuff, it has to be transparent in a lot of ways. I see a lot of times where we put vague things, even in the training, we may put vague things, or we use more complex words, right? You need it to be straight down to the point of the truth when you're creating stuff or talking about stuff or having those conversations, so that your general people know and they feel comfortable with it. But then on the other side, I think as L&D, we have a responsibility to upskill our leaders, to upskill, the frontline managers, the executives, or even, the main people. How do you interact with your coworkers on this psychologically safe level? And, there's a lot of elements come in, but I think part of it stops at L&D, and how are we actually enabling people to have these skills?
Yeah, I'll share from my own perspective that the foundational nature of this, I feel like psychological safety, and even to go a step further to say trust, is also foundational for things like collaboration. And we know that the biggest challenges and problems that most organizations face require a level of collaboration that's going to require this level of psychological safety. I challenge my leadership team to think in what we call unconstrained thinking. And it's really hard to do that if you don't feel safe and you're in a trusted environment. So I think it's more important now than it's ever been before. But let's talk about what we actually mean when we talk about psychological safety. And Keith, and you and I were preparing for this. One of the things that you said is that psychological safety it's more than being nice. Can you talk a little bit about what you mean when you say it's more than being nice?
Yeah, I think a lot of people have this view of psychological safety where, hey, I accept everyone, but maybe you don't. But you're just like, as long as I don't poke the right buttons on them, or as long as I work beside them, it's a psychologically safe environment, right? We don't have animosity against each other. I don't dislike this person, but I'm also not gonna, have full conversations with them, right? That's almost this passive aggressive environment that's of the days of old. As long as we don't cause problems with each other, we're all happy. It's more than being nice and cordial. It's about interacting with them, getting to know them as a person, being aware of, we talk about microaggressions and things, of comments that might rile it up, where that person might be in the let's be nice method and they let it go. So there may not be even anything said about it, but if you're more aware of how to handle situations, not to make comments, what to say, what to say, it creates this environment beyond we're just nice people. We can actually thrive together and learn.
Yeah, I would say it's probably part of the difference between just working together and actually being a high performing team, right? So that being nice is fine if you're just working together, maybe. But if you want to be a high performing team, it really has to go to the next level. One of this is probably my favorite question that we came up with for this webinar, and I can't wait to hear your answer now. How do you create psychological safety even when you're training people on topics that are uncomfortable, and they're intentionally uncomfortable. There are plenty of topics that we need to train people on that people should actually feel uncomfortable in. How do you bridge that with the concept of psychological safety so that people can actually learn those uncomfortable things?
I think it starts with a culture, to be honest. It's not all, L&D is not the solution to psychological safety solely. It's about a culture of it. And does the organization truly put their people first? Does an organization really make people feel like they can speak up, ask questions, not fear getting things wrong? It even goes down to, from an L&D standpoint, we can pull so much data these days. Do they trust that if they make mistakes in a learning environment, that manager is not going to go pull that data and go, oh my gosh, they said this or they said that? It takes me back to the early days when we used to do 360, 180 assessments in organizations, and we didn't have the technology, and it was all done by hand. And I remember doing it in the hospitality industry, and all the managers, when that was done, are sitting in the office trying to figure out handwriting. Just who said this, who said that? And while I think we've largely gotten away from that with all the new technologies, with that type of stuff, that fear's still there with people. That people still there. I can't tell you how many people I hear regularly say, I don't put any comments on those types of assessments because I don't know who it was. And that's an environment of, we have to break that fear and go, it's not really a judgment thing. As long as you're not being unsafe or it's a major risk, we don't care who said it because we want to learn from it. We want to move. And I think it's just that people first, being honest, and we're going to go more into that later on, so I don't want to go too deep into that people first environment yet.
I think that's right, though. Getting the culture right helps create the environment and creates those safe spaces. And then you can have uncomfortable conversations. That's part of our job. Let's talk about psychological safety today, like in this moment, right? Massive tech disruption. Generative AI is creating rapid innovation. This is creating a high degree of uncertainty among employees about the future of their job, potentially uncovering skill gaps. The anxiety level of employees has to be shooting through the roof in many scenarios. How do you maintain psychological safety in that environment?
I think starting out, it's being upfront and honest, because they know the truth in a lot of ways. They may not know the scope. So if you're telling them something opposite than what is known, they know you're not honest, right? So we need to be very upfront and say, hey, AI, there probably will be job loss at some point. That can't be avoided. That's the nature of it, right? But let's talk to them and go, hey, but here's the deal. We're going to upskill you. We're going to build you. We're going to make you better. And you might find that it's not as catastrophic as people think when it comes to that. Maybe it's just a leverage tool. But giving them the skills that, hey, regardless of what happens, at least you're going to be upskilled. At least you have options, right? That's never the conversation you want to have as an employer. You never want to say, I'm not upskilling you for your next position. But we can't forget that there are people coming into it. We can't forget that there's going to be fears. And honesty is the best way of saying this may happen, but also being honest with the roadmap of what you can share. Hey, realistically, 10 years down the road, we might, but we don't have anything on our trajectory right now, right? We're not in the back office writing down names and cutting, head count, but being honest about that's the reality. And the important is for you to build your skills now so that things work better in the long run. And so you're a valuable asset to us or wherever you may end up in the long run. I think it's about transparency, honesty with the whole process.
I think that's so spot on. And I was speaking with a leader actually of a university not too long ago, and universities are an area that AI is likely to disrupt quite a bit. And I know we actually have some universities on the call today, and the president of this university said, I think it is only fair to my employees to be honest with them, but then to invite them to be part of the journey of transforming this particular university into what it's going to become with AI. And if you are honest with them and let them be a part of that journey, I think that's the only responsible thing that you can do. And I think that's the safest environment. And his point was, we can either do that, or in 3 or 4 years, they'll be displaced, right? And that's not fair to anyone, and it doesn't actually help drive things forward. So I love that honesty, the transparency. And then I just add, bring people on the journey with you. And I think that can create a level of emotional safety for them as well, if they know that they're in the conversations as opposed to conversations happening about them.
Well, and I think bringing them along the journey brings up a point that I bring up all the time, which is what I call them like resume highlights, right? Resume projects. This journey is going to have a lot of stuff people are going to accomplish that's never been accomplished before.
Sure.
And it still gives them confidence, of, hey, this is a huge deal. This is going to be, something that you want to be able to say, wow, I worked to accomplish this. I went through this journey. And that's sometimes how you have to frame it. Not even that, but hey, this is something in your career that you want to hallmark. Maybe you call it career hallmarks rather than, resume projects, but things that people are going to learn from, they're going to be proud of in the end. And it gives them that confidence to keep going through with you.
No, I love that. So while we're talking about, these topics, let's talk about this. Let's get some people to interact with us here. So in the chat, so attendees, you have the attendee chat there. Can you just answer in the chat, how do you make people feel safe while talking about difficult topics? What are some strategies, some tactics that you use that could be practical for other folks on the call to adopt? Anybody willing to share? And while we're doing that, I'll just ask you, can you just share one, Keith, from you while we're waiting on some folks to hit us up in the chat?
Yeah, when it comes to talking about difficult topics, it's easy for me to go back to what I said earlier of, hey, let's circle back to that people first. But I think it also comes down to what type of environment you're putting them in, having the conversation. Sometimes you have to preload the conversation with them before you have the topic, right? You need to say, hey, this is what we're going to talk about, lay it out clearly, and then have the conversation. Because depending on how that person is, if you blindside them, they're never going to feel safe, no matter how much you've built with them. You have to really know who your audience is and tailor that conversation to their personal needs. And that gets back to just knowing your team, knowing your employees, stuff like that.
I love what's happening in the chat over here, and I would encourage you to keep going here. I mean, the idea of setting context, acknowledging that this might be a hard conversation, being empathetic, there's building trust and the way that you listen, always having, to your point about having a culture of this, an open door policy. There's a lot of things that you can do to help create a safe environment, even though you know that you have to talk about difficult things. One of the other ones, and we're going to get to this in just a minute, that's mentioned in here, and Keith, I know you're super excited to talk about this, is failure and the way that you treat failure as an organization. So let's put a pin in that, and we're going to come back to that particular one in just a little bit. But keep going in the chat here, and I know there's some other folks from ETU on who will respond to that, but I appreciate the feedback in the chat. Really good stuff.
I think one that stands out is facial expressions. That's one we don't think about a lot. What's your face saying in the conversation?
Micro expressions. And that's one too, where I think there's a difference between having a hard conversation on Zoom and having a hard conversation face to face. There are some micro expressions and stuff that sometimes can get lost in a digital world. And so I think it's important to understand not only the context of the conversation, but also the medium and how that works. So let's do an example of how company training, how learning and development can actually foster psychological safety. So this is a company that's going through a restructuring, and the team is concerned, right? It's turned into a problem for one specific employee, and we're going to actually just show a clip of this, and we're actually going to have a little interaction here on what happened. So this is a quick video that we're going to watch of a situation that you have with an employee that's going through a restructuring. It's caused a personal problem, and then we're going to actually do a quick poll and see how people would respond to the situation. So with that, let's run the video.
I know we have a meeting scheduled for later, but it's a lot to take in. I'm really worried that everything I've done in the last 12 months will count for nothing, and I'll be starting right back at the beginning with a new team, a new manager, and I can't believe I put in all those extra hours to be right back where I started. Is there any chance the restructuring won't happen? That's good to hear. I'm sorry I'm getting so emotional. It's been a
Phil, I think your audio might be out.
Sorry about that. Let's jump to the poll here. So we've got three options here of how you might respond to that. Option A, you don't need to apologize, Donna. I'm sorry to hear about this. Thanks for letting me know. You got a lot on your plate. Anyone would be upset. Let me know if you need to take a time off and attend to your mom. I know you feel my dad was sick last year. I think we might have a little bit of a disconnect here on our polls here. Let's talk. Let's jump ahead a little bit here, Keith. That's an example of a situation that we would be in. Let's talk just in the chat. What are some ways that you could respond to that employee situation that would help that employee through that difficult situation? So jump into the attendee chat and what are some ways that you would respond to that employee who's really struggling with the upcoming restructuring that's happening? Keith, how would you respond to that particular employee?
Oh, that's a tough one because I'm very freewheeling. So when you give me these like structured answers, I start to struggle with like, oh, how would I respond?
Yeah, I think
now you're going to put me on the spot. I'm going to pick the wrong one. See, this is how it goes. I think just reading quickly from the top one, I think I'd go with C, because you're apologizing, but you're also showing support, right? We have a wellness program. May not be the optimal answer because it shows you kind of making assumptions with we have a lot on your plate. I think you might need help through a difficult time, right? But it is showing, hey, we do have options to help you. It is showing that. So that might be the middle answer, knowing how ETO simulation works. But yeah, that's probably where I would go with that one.
Yeah, I think acknowledging the context that the situation is happening in makes a lot of sense, but you also don't want to ignore the reality of the situation. You want, to your earlier point, you just got to be honest and transparent about what might happen. So let's see here. We have 56% saying it's option A, 43% saying it's option C, and then the optimal answer, according to the people that really manage this stuff, is option A. Acknowledge, validate feelings, and then don't just try to solution things right away. Make sure that you're empathetic. There's nuance here, right? And that's one of the things with soft skills and then creating that level of trust, is that you've got to understand and be a part of that nuance. So let's talk a little bit about what are some ways that we actually can really help people manage their way through difficult conversations and create a psychologically safe environment. So the first thing, and this is where I mentioned where we put a pin in this before, and Keith, this is something I know you feel really strongly about, but the first step is allowing for safe failure, right? So can you talk a little bit about your experience with this, and maybe in both scenarios where it hasn't been a safe place to fail for you, and then some examples of how your managers or your leaders or you have created a place where you can fail safely, experiment, and not feel like you're going to be punished for that?
Yeah, let me start with where it's not safe. Haven't looked at all the organizations on the attendee list, so I apologize if anyone's from the hospitality industry, but this is my experience. I spent years in the hospitality industry and operations, and in a lot of ways, the reality is you are disposable in there. There's so many people to fill a spot. And when you're in that industry, it's literally sometimes feels like the next choice you make could be your last. Oh, I didn't order this because I didn't have enough in the budget. And next thing you know, you're shutting your doors for a couple hours to restock. Or it could be as simple as, hey, I let this employee do X. Well, there's not HR departments like organizations. You're acting as HR. So you're under this pressure of you're expected to perform at top notch, but also if you make a mistake, you're going to pay for it. But likewise, places where it's worked best, I have two examples. The first will be the highlight of the hospitality industry. Is I grew up under a leader who used to always use this quote is, I will take a bullet for anyone on my team, but I only take one. And the story behind that is go ahead and fail, but don't do it more than once, and don't do multiple mistakes, but don't fail the same time over and over again. Learn from your mistake and keep going from it, change from it. And that was very meaningful with me and stuck with me a lot. And I do use that quote sometimes even with my team is, if you fail, I'll take the heat for you. I'll run interference. We'll discuss it. I'll have the conversations. Just don't do it again and learn from it. And
yeah, the truth is growth comes from failure, right? So a lot of our simulation clients, they actually use simulations because it can be a safe place to make mistakes and try different things and see if they're right. Now, when we were prepping for this, you talked a lot about something that comes up a lot, but I don't think people ever fully grasp, and that is the idea of failing fast and allowing people to fail fast. Can you talk a little bit about how the environment can be created to allow people to fail fast and to both learn from that, but also like what do you have to do to make that possible?
Yeah, I think the hardest thing is one of the things you have to do as a leader, especially to let your people learn to fail fast, is to let go. And I say that in the sense of, when I'm managing a team, once I know they know what they're doing for the most part, I don't micromanage. I don't watch their steps. I tell them to almost take the ask forgiveness, not permission approach to a certain extent. And if it fails, come back and tell me why. Tell me what you learned from it. Don't just say, oh, it's messed up, but tell me. And I think a lot of times as leaders or as L&D departments, we try to prop it up, right? Oh, this is failing. How do we save it? We need to be as leaders able to walk away and say, let it fall, let it fail, instead of propping it up, because that also builds an environment of, we don't ever let anything fail here. It might be a failure, but we're going to keep putting up that facade. So I think
and
it's
you don't,
really
then people don't want to share when they see something failing. They don't want to talk about it because they don't want to be called out for failure. I think that's spot on. Let's talk about another step that you can take to create this. The idea of practicing in realistic but still low risk environments. What's your perspective on this? And I know you guys are a big user of simulated based learning, but talk about the way that you let people practice in a low stakes environment.
Yeah, I think the low stakes environment in itself, the technology is great out there, the simulation, stuff like that, but it's nice because people know they're there, right? When you it used to be, oh, let's, do role playing in that stuff. And people are like, oh, well, it's not safe because people are still judging me. The nice thing about simulations and approaches like this is that people can go on there and repeat over and over and over again. They can make the mistakes. They can purposely choose the wrong answers just to see what the other answers are, right? And see what responses are, right? That's the type of environment people want to play in, because inherently, I think people want to sometimes just be bad. And I don't mean that in a bad way, but they want to see, okay, how does this person respond? And they actually learn just as much from choosing the wrong answers as the right answers. So instead of putting all these tight constraints on the learning process of, here's a slide, this is what you're going to say, here's a slide, give them a simulation where they can play, they can explore, they can take multiple routes if they want to see what the responses are, and just really let them do what they need to do to fully understand the topic. And to me, things like simulations and stuff are the best success when you can go and see people taking the same one multiple times, because that means they're fully engaged and they're really learning. Unless it's someone, in the L&D department that's trying to troubleshoot something and you see them in there 30 times, that's a complete red flag there. But, let your employees go in, know it's safe, make it open to them to do it as much as they want, however they want, and don't lock them down.
So we know that practice and simulation, that's a low stakes environment, but we also know that it's not the real thing, right? And so how does that translate into the high stakes situation, the real world? What are some examples of that, and how do you help people then bridge that gap into actual retention and performance in the organization?
Yeah. So, I'll start with, how we do that. I'll kind of do it backwards. So I think part of it is in a high stakes environment, you can't simulate everything. You can put someone, a bomb technician, and put them in a simulation 300 times, but it's not going to be the same as it is when they're actually having to cut the red wire or the green wire. So what you have to do is transition, right? The simulation will get you so far in the process, but it's not going to actually give you the full real environment. So the goal is to get them as safe as possible and as knowledgeable as possible to get them in the real environment and feel the stresses of it. And I think the example you're alluding to, Phil, that I talked about when we were getting ready for this was my brother works for a aeronautical company that builds fighter jets and different jets like that. And he's lucky enough to work in the simulator division, which has got to be a blast. And,
Yeah, really
I
cool.
was telling Phil, my brother will come home from work one day and I go, "What'd you do?" He goes, "Oh, I took a plane and I flew over Nevada and did a U-turn over San Francisco and came back." And I'm like, "Well, that's awesome." This guy's, first of all, he's not a pilot. He's colorblind, so he can't even be a fighter pilot. But he can fly a plane. But I'll tell you what, I would not trust him flying me a plane in the real world. Simulators are completely different. Now, the converse side of that, if I was in a plane and it was going down at a pilot certain capacity, I'd want him there better than someone I don't know next to me, because at least he knows what the instruments are, right? So there's two sides to that. It may also give them the ability of, in an absolute dire situation, it's the next best choice, because at least you've been in a simulation, even if you haven't been in the real thing. So it's almost this double-sided coin there.
Yeah.
It's not ideal, but sometimes it can help. But the big thing is you have to transition to that real world eventually. You can't just stay in the practice mode.
Yep, I think that's spot on. So let's just really quickly, let's do a quick live poll. Is your company currently implementing learning programs that let you practice realistic scenarios in a safe environment? So I'm going to start the poll, and please submit your answer. But then also, if you have any context you want to share in the chat, please go ahead and do that. So let's get some answers here. Are you implementing learning programs that let your employees practice real world scenarios, but do it in a safe environment? And then I'm really looking for some commentary here too on how you do that, or what you're able to do with your employees. Okay, here come the submissions. So yes, it works. No, not yet. Yes, but it hasn't actually translated into job skills very well. So, okay, we'll just give it just a few more seconds. We got a few more people I can see typing and interacting. Okay, some people, oh no, Kevin's not doing that. Okay, well, maybe that's something that people could help with. And some people doing it offline. I love that. I think sometimes offline face-to-face can be really good. It doesn't scale as well, but I think there's good stuff. All right, let's see what the results of the poll are. Okay, so 46% say yes, and it works. 38%, 39% say no, not yet. And 15 say yes, but right now it's not translating into actual job skills. I would love in the chat, for those that are not doing it yet, or that are doing it and it's not translating very well, I would love to just see some dialogue about either why you're not doing it or why you think it's not actually translating into job skills. So I'll let that chat kind of go for a bit here, and while we move on to step 3, and that's delivering feedback that builds confidence. So how do you create a culture where people actually are receptive and they're in the right frame to be able to receive feedback? Giving and receiving feedback is so important for an organization to develop high performance. Keith, can you talk a little bit about how Merck does feedback and creates a culture where people are willing to both give feedback, but also get in the right mindset to receive feedback and take that on board and action it?
Yeah, I think at Merck we constantly have feedback sessions. It sometimes feels like you get more feedback than you do production, but no, the reality is you have to create that environment where people are used to it, first of all, right? We have people that come in from other organizations or other organizations where they don't give feedback, period. So the first time you even say something that's like slightly tilted to, it might be semi-rough feedback, but it's really not bad, they go off the deep end and think that, they're going to get fired, their job is over, right? So that goes back to like the real-time continuous feedback and the fact that people get used to it quicker. People know what it is. And it could be spoken feedback between managers and people. It could be a simulation. It could be training where, hey, you didn't quite get this, instead of doing it all the time. It's got to be all the time instead of just waiting. That goes back to, if you're training a dog or, you're teaching them to house break, you can't go back 4 hours later and scold it for going to the bathroom on their carpet. You have to do it right away. Otherwise, people may not even remember or resonate or connect with it. And that's how you stop mistakes early, is if you have someone that's making a mistake and you correct it right then, they're not going to make it 10 more times before you finally catch them and tell them to do it thing. But I think the important thing is, Phil, you got something you're thinking there?
I'm fascinated by this because my leadership team right now we're going through some training on giving and receiving feedback. And it's been really helpful. One of the things that has come up is kind of reframing feedback, right? The idea of we're using the phrase feedback is a gift, right? Because usually the easiest thing for somebody to do is to not give you feedback. Usually the easiest thing to do is to not say anything at all, right? And to just let that continue. And so when people have the courage to give you feedback, assuming that it's valid feedback, then that's a gift to you, right? It's not somebody trying to hurt you. And when you reframe it in that context, I think it can create a really safe space. Now we're not good at this yet at ETU as a company. We're getting better, but I also think it's a skill. I think giving and receiving feedback is a skill that can be developed. And so I love this, and it really resonated with me because my leadership team, as we go through our leadership training, is literally the call. Our leadership team call tomorrow is specifically on receiving feedback and being in the right mindset to receive feedback. So I'm just delighted to see this here, and I hope that at ETU we have that culture. But yeah, I think this is really a really important step. So let's keep moving here. I don't want to belabor any point, but let's talk about step 4. How you deliver training matters. And so one of the step 4 is, create media that works for your organization. So we watched a video earlier. Can you, Keith, talk about the different types of media that you use at Merck? What's the most successful? What creates the best learning environment? What helps people feel safe? And we're also living in this new world where it's very difficult to tell what is real and what is synthetic and AI generated. How are you adapting to that new technology at Merck?
Yeah, so I think, when you're talking about media, looking at media, there's always a million ways to do it. And I think the first thing we consider is the original media, which is face-to-face, right? That's truly the original media. And does this topic fit that? Because sometimes, especially when we're talking psychological safety and failing and testing, doing it face-to-face doesn't always work. It's like going back to, the role-playing and how everybody used to hate it. So I think you evaluate what's going to match first. And then you can go from there of, hey, is this text? Is this, synthetic media? Is it actual people that we can connect with? There's times where if you want to make a safe environment, this topic might be best if it's done by people these people know and can relate with. They have that connection. I believe someone told me that Microsoft maybe, or an organization, don't correct me wrong in the comments if I'm wrong, but they've been using the same training actors for like 30 years, it seems like. And now people feel like they have personal relationships with these people they see in the training. And that's like, that also creates psychological safety. Is the cost exorbitant? Yes. But it creates that environment where it's a good media. I think synthetic media is valuable. It's scary to some degree when you look at the full ramifications, but it's valuable if it's used right and it's used to win. We had this great discussion, Phil, setting up for this about how when you can build this almost human thing, if it doesn't look right, it makes people uneasy. And I think that's where you have to use your gut. Right, you have to, if you're watching this synthetic media and something feels off, that means you need to reevaluate it and see, okay, it's just you, show it to someone else. How do you feel? Don't prompt them, and really gut check that type of media to make sure that you're not going to make people uneasy by watching it, just because the slightest little nuance is off and it might make them uneasy.
Yeah, I was meeting with our one of our AI partners that we're using for our launch of our new product, ETU Create, in November, and they do synthetic media. And one of the things that's evidently really hard is doing realistic laughing with synthetic media. Laughter can come across as really cynical, like it's hard to get laughter right in synthetic media. And so if you've got a situation that requires laughing, that might be something where synthetic media is not a good fit right now. Now, I say that, I'm sure that people are working to solve that particular problem right now, and that it will be better in 3 months than it is today, because it's just evolving so rapidly. I do agree, though, that it's context sensitive, right? There are times where live one-on-one, either face-to-face or Zoom, is the right media. That does not scale. And so then there's times where, simulations, video, that can be a real powerful medium. And so I think you've got choices, and that's part of what can make people that really understand learning and develop so valuable, is understanding what to use and when, like what are the situations and what are the outcomes that I'm trying to achieve. So yeah, really thoughtful. Let's move to step 5 here. Measure the progress with skills data. There's so much data that comes out of learning and development. If you do it right, that can include face-to-face, it can include online, it can include on-the-job training, but there's so much data to leverage. Can you share some examples, Keith, from your organization of where you're using data to both give managers better information, but also to adapt your own learning and development processes and tools?
I think we're always looking at data. There's so much data out there, and we look at things like engagement reports and, the stereotypical stuff that everybody says they have and everybody complains is not good enough and everything else under the sun. But if you actually look at the data that can guide decisions, rather than buying into, an NPS score or a, engagement report, or how long did people drop out of the learning and all the completion rates, all that data is valuable, and that's why it's there. You just have to actually commit to analyzing the data, looking for trends, and going in and dig deeper, right? If you find a program where, say it's a VILT or something like that, and 30% is consistently abandoning halfway through, that data doesn't mean a whole lot. But now let's find out why. Is it the content? Is it the presenter? Is it the slide decks are just so egregious they can't sit there anymore and see it, right? So take the data that we have and double click down to find the whys behind what it is, whether it's good or bad. You could have one program that's just off the charts great and the other one that's struggling. Well, what's the difference? How do we modify it? How do we look at it better? And as far as learning data, what are people grabbing onto? Where are they falling? And being able to either in the next iteration improve that section, make a one-off training, and use that type of data to guide your roadmap of where do we need to improve.
Yeah, I think that makes total sense. So let's actually turn this out to the audience. After seeing these elements, what are you going to go do to build a more psychologically safe workplace? Let's use the chat again, and I'll try to hit the highlights. What are some things practical ways that you would apply some of these steps? Anything that was new or different that you really picked up on in this chat? The feedback one really stuck with me because it's an area that we're already working on, and now I'm trying to think through how do I make it more psychologically safe to both give and receive feedback, and that one really resonated with me. Keith, which of those stood out the most to you?
I think it's honestly yours. The feedback is a gift, right? And that you have to be skilled to receive and give. So often we focus on giving feedback. And
Yep.
As leaders, I think it's even more difficult of receiving feedback. And receiving feedback from someone who's not above you, receiving feedback by your team, receiving feedback from coworkers, in your parallels. And that is really a skill.
I'm just kind of keeping up on the chat here, which is hard to do in my seat because I don't think everybody sees everything, but Emily just made a great comment here. Think of the skill of giving feedback like training a muscle. You have to use it or you will lose it. I think that's absolutely right. I would say it also applies to receiving feedback and being in the right mindset for that. So I think that's really good feedback. There's some comments around sandboxing, giving people trials, trial approaches, letting them know that feedback is there, open, radically open conversations. Somebody's looking at maybe doing some more online modules or some simulations. I think those are great opportunities. So yeah, getting people used to it. Diona, that's right. Getting people used to so that they don't see it as safe. When it becomes part of the culture and part of the environment, then people don't have to feel like it's an unsafe place. I think that's really good. So let me let's actually, Keith, let me just get really specific. What with you, what is happening at Merck with once you've really tried to solve for the psychological safety element in the training at Merck? Can you talk a little bit about the very specific results that you guys are seeing after you've implemented some of these things?
Yeah, they're on here on the screen. 50% faster to train with scenario-based training. 21% increase in learner performance. Reduced errors. We're seeing overall improvement in the training altogether by using simulations. We're seeing people enjoy it more, and it makes it much more effective.
Yeah. So compare these results to like what was it like before? I mean, these are massive improvements, and I think anybody would be very proud of this. Like, how does that translate into business into business results outside of just training results? What is the business telling you about how this is working?
They're happy with it. A lot of times we get that feedback from them of that, hey, we just need the training done, we just need that. But now they're saying, oh, wow, we're becoming a partner in the organization to solve problems. We're now that group that, hey, how can we solve this problem, rather than training being we don't really want to do it, but we feel like we're going to have to do it. Or you become the thought partner with them. Hey, how can we solve this more innovatively? Or how can we find this solution? So it's really, from our impact of the business, it's about building that better relationship with the business so that they come to us and we can then consult and work together as a team to solve problems. More of, I guess, a psychological safe environment than before, where you kind of, I guess we'll call training and see what they can do.
Are you sharing these results with both leadership and with the managers in the business as well, so that they understand what's happening, and what's their response when they see this type of improvement?
I think to some degree we're sharing results. I don't know specifics on which ones we're showing consistently, things like that, but I definitely know leadership is extremely happy with the results we're seeing. I think sometimes the business, they will, but they get lost because of their own data and stuff. They just see the success. And at the end of the day, I think a lot of times that's what matters with them, is seeing the success. Is it working? Is it not? And that's what helps a lot.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. So what's the next? Let's give some people some practical next steps here for what you can do to create psychologically safe environments and to help people. And Keith, I'm going to let you kind of take this, and then I'll provide some color as you go.
Yeah, so I think next steps is, audit your culture. Are you creating an environment that is psychologically safe? This is the organization as a whole. That's got to be first. If you don't have the culture, no amount of simulations, no amount of training, none of that's going to help. So you have to have buy-in. And I think this is where I said in our discussion, it doesn't, you all hear all the time that it starts from the top down, right? Psychological safety or anything else, it doesn't start from the top down. It starts with your frontline leaders. If your frontline leaders are not creating a psychological safe environment for their teams, it's not going to grow. And I say that as it starts, it doesn't mean not everybody else above them has to be working on it, but you have to start with that frontline leaders, because they're touching the most of the population base of the organization. Implement simulations and scenarios learning. give people a safe place to fail. I think that's a high point here. Safe place to fail, safe place to experiment, safe place to learn, and then use the data that you have to refine those, or to refine approaches, or find new topics. You have to use the whole encompassing of it all to truly execute on it. You could do some of these, one of the three by itself, and it would make improvement. You can do another one but if you don't have the full picture, you're never going to reach that pinnacle point where you truly feel like you live in a psychologically safe environment for work.
Yeah, your first point just really resonated with me again. The idea that frontline managers, I mean, it's great. You want to have leaders that are open and candid and open to feedback and are, create psychologically safe environments. But the vast majority of people really look to their line manager or their direct manager for most of their information and for most of culture. That's both direct one-on-one and as part of their team. And so it's so important that we work on those skills with our frontline managers. It can't just be something that we talk about. It's actually something that we have to develop. It's part of, I think, for L&D leaders, this is part of our job, is to help train or develop people to be able to create those kind of environments. And I think it can be really important, and it can lead to much, much higher performance as a team. So listen, Keith, thank you so much for being a part of this. We would love for you, as the sponsor of this webinar, to try a simulation. Go check out ETU and what we've done. Merck is a great example of how simulations can be transformative in learning and development. We want you to see what's possible. So we believe that we can help most organizations create psychologically safe environments for people to fail, just like and to learn and to grow. And we're excited about that. It's why we wake up every morning. And it's why we've been so excited to work with Merck now for several years. So Keith, any closing thoughts or any closing ideas that you want to share with your colleagues that are out there watching us today?
I would just say, be passionate. I know the topic of this has been largely AI. Is, be transparent with the future, encourage others to be transparent, and upskill, constantly upskill yourself, your team, your organization, and get people more prepared for the future.
Yeah. Well, listen, we've got a few minutes left here. We've got a couple of questions in the chat, and Keith, since we have just a couple minutes left, let's go ahead and answer some questions here. What would you consider the key skills for frontline managers? And let me pause there. There's some suggestions in the chat, but what would you consider the key skills for at Merck specifically, for your frontline managers?
I think, at Merck or other organizations I've been at, I think the key skills, I'm going to go very broad here, is the people skills. Over time, I've learned that I can teach just about anyone to do anything that they need to do. And you can teach people skills, you can refine people skills, but also they have to have the personality for it. So I think really it's, hey, how do you interact with people? Are you empathetic? Do you understand feedback the right way? So it's really the people soft skills is what should be your key skills for your frontline people. All too often, frontline leaders are someone who is just good at their job and got promoted because they needed to fill a slot, and no one's invested the time with them to really refine those softer skills that you don't necessarily have to have as a individual contributor, that you now have to have as a people leader.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. I think it's important when you say people skills. That's a good starting point. I love the way that you got more specific there: empathy, listening, communication. It's so easy to say, oh well, they need to work on their people skills. Well, what does that mean? People skills can mean a lot of things. And so I think it's important to then drill down to, okay, in our specific company, in our specific scenario, what are those skills that we think are the most important? Is it feedback? But I absolutely agree. The training on technical skills or the actual, skill functions, that's probably, Keith, I don't want to speak for you, but that's probably the easiest part of your job, right? Like it's the people interactions, it's managing conflict, it's negotiation. Those are things that I think are much, much harder to teach. and much harder to train people on. But also probably create more value because they actually enable people to leverage those technical and those more job specific skills.
Well, and I think those are the skills too that a lot of people just make this broad assumption. Either they have it or they don't. They don't realize you can build those skills.
Yeah, they are skills. They are trainable in the same way that working on a CNC machine or doing pharmaceutical experiments. Those are skills that you can develop as well. So I think it's important to think of those as skills, not just as character traits or personality types. Okay, well, listen, thank you everyone for joining today.